A single whispered sentence from Winter Aespa triggers a chain of secrets, revealing a hidden identity tied to Jungkook BTS in a tense, cinematic fiction. The microphone was still on when Winter said it, and the words slipped out of her mouth like a shard of glass cutting through silence. "Jungkook, you promised." The studio lights froze the air in white heat, cameras humming like insects that smelled blood, and Winter felt her lungs lock as the realization hit her a second too late. She had been laughing a moment ago, teasing the host, her fingers tapping a nervous rhythm against her thigh the way she always did when memories crept too close. Now every sound seemed to stretch, distorted, as if the world itself had leaned in to listen. Across the room, a producer dropped his pen. Somewhere behind the glass, a staff member inhaled sharply. Winter's eyes flicked toward the camera, then away, her heart pounding so hard it felt visible beneath her ribs. She swallowed, forcing a smile that trembled at the edges, but the damage was already done. Jungkook's name wasn't just a name. Not here. Not now. Not with that tone, that familiarity, that unguarded softness she had never allowed herself to show in public. The host blinked, confused, then amused, sensing a story without understanding its weight. Winter's palms were damp. The scent of warm electronics and stale coffee filled her nose, grounding her in a room that suddenly felt like a trap. What no one could see was the flash of another place, another time, slamming into her mind with brutal clarity. Rain-soaked asphalt, the echo of footsteps in an alley behind a rehearsal hall, a hood pulled low, a voice whispering plans that were never meant to exist in daylight. She had promised herself she would never say it again. She had promised him to as the cameras cut to a commercial break. Winter stood too quickly, the chair scraping loud against the floor. The applause track played, cheerful and fake, but behind it she caught the murmur rising, a low tide of questions. She bowed automatically, muscle memory taking over, and walked off set with measured steps that hid the way her legs threatened to give out. Her manager's hand closed around her wrist the moment they were out of sight. "What did you just do?" he hissed, his breath hot with panic. Winter shook her head once, unable to find words that wouldn't unravel everything. Her chest burned. She could still hear her own voice in her ears, soft and lethal. "Jungkook, you promised." In a black van idling outside. Jungkook stared at his phone, watching the clip replay on mute. He had known this moment would come someday. He just hadn't expected it to arrive wrapped in such a small, human mistake. The city lights slid across the tinted window like ghosts, and his reflection stared back at him, familiar and wrong. He ran a hand through his hair, a habit he had picked up when thinking too hard, and exhaled slowly through his nose. For years, he had lived with two identities stitched together by silence. To the world, he was Jungkook of BTS, the golden voice, the relentless dancer, the smile that made stadiums scream. Beneath that, there was another self, forged in secrecy, carrying a name that was never written down, a role that had nothing to do with music. Winter knew both versions. That was the danger. That was the trust. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number appeared, just 3 words long. They heard it too. Jungkook closed his eyes, jaw tightening. He had always feared exposure, but not like this. Not because of her. Winter wasn't careless. She was meticulous to the point of obsession, checking doors twice, memorizing schedules, hating surprises. If she had slipped, it meant something inside her had cracked. Winter locked herself in the dressing room bathroom and pressed her forehead against the cool mirror. Her reflection looked the same as always, pale under the lights, eyes too bright, lips bitten raw. She turned on the tap just to hear something other than her thoughts. Water rushed, white noise trying and failing to drown the past. She remembered the first time she met him without the stage between them. He had been late, breathless, eyes scanning the shadows like someone hunted. She had almost laughed then, thinking it was an act, until she saw the scar along his wrist and the way his hand hovered near his pocket as if expecting a weapon. They had been kids with impossible schedules and impossible secrets, drawn together by an accident neither of them could undo. "You don't know who I am," he had said quietly, voice stripped of performance. "And it has to stay that way." Winter had nodded, even as curiosity burned. She had always been good at keeping things in. Too good. It was how she survived. It was how she became Winter, freezing over emotions that might slow her down. But secrets had weight, and over time, the weight had grown heavy enough to bend her spine. Her phone vibrated now, pulling her back. A single message lit the screen. "Are you okay?" She laughed once, a short, broken sound, and sank to the floor, her back against the cabinet. Okay was a word she barely recognized anymore. Her fear wasn't just about scandal or headlines. It was about what would happen if people started asking the right questions. If they followed the thread she had just dropped. Outside, the industry moved fast, rumors igniting like dry grass. Fans clipped the moment, slowed it down, replayed it from different angles. Comment sections bloomed with theories, some playful, some sharp enough to draw blood. A single sentence had cracked open a door no one knew existed. Jungkook stepped out of the van into the underground parking lot, the echo of his footsteps bouncing off concrete. He liked places like this, liminal and unseen, where he could breathe. He leaned against a pillar and typed back with steady fingers. "I'm coming." He knew that meant breaking rules he had lived by for years. Distance had been part of the deal, the price of safety. But Winter's voice in that clip wasn't reckless. It was tired. It was lonely. It was human in a way that frightened him more than exposure ever could. When he reached her building, the night air smelled like rain and exhaust. He pulled his hood up out of habit, even though no one was there to see him. The elevator ride felt endless, each floor a drumbeat in his chest. He rehearsed what he would say, then abandoned every version. There were no lines for this. Winter opened the door before he could knock. Her eyes were red, but her posture was rigid, controlled. For a second they just stood there, two people balancing on the edge of a life they weren't supposed to share. "I didn't mean to," she said, the words spilling out finally, voice shaking. "I don't know why it came out like that." Jungkook stepped inside and closed the door behind him, the click loud in the quiet room. He took off his hood, meeting her gaze. "I know," he said. His voice was calm, but beneath it ran a current of fear she recognized as her own. "You've been holding too much." She nodded, tears finally breaking free, and covered her mouth with her hand, a habit from childhood she never outgrew. He moved closer, slow and careful, as if approaching a wild animal, and rested his forehead against hers. The room smelled faintly of lavender and cold air, a sanctuary built on borrowed time. "We can't undo it," she whispered. "No," he agreed. "But we can choose what happens next." In that moment, with the city breathing around them and the world already whispering their names together, the secret shifted. It was no longer just a burden. It was a choice. Winter closed her eyes, feeling the tremor in her hands settle as his presence steadied her. Whatever came after, whatever truth surfaced, they would face it awake. And somewhere far beyond that small, quiet room, a story began to change, not because of a grand reveal or a calculated move, but because of one honest sentence that refused to stay buried. The first thing Winter heard was Jungkook's voice breaking the silence, low and sharp, cutting through the room like a blade. "Do you have any idea how fast this is spreading?" She flinched, not because he was angry, but because he was afraid, and Jungkook almost never let fear rise to the surface. She hugged her arms around herself, nails digging into her sleeves. "I saw the clips. I saw the comments. I'm not stupid." "Then why did you say it like that?" His tone rose despite himself. "Not Jungkook," sunbeam him. "Not joking. Not safe. You said it like..." He stopped, jaw tightening, eyes dark. "Like someone who knows me too well." Winter laughed bitterly and finally looked up at him. "Because I do. And because I'm tired of pretending I don't." The words hit him harder than any accusation. He turned away, pacing the narrow living room, running a hand through his hair again and again. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance, fading like a warning they were already too late to hear. "This wasn't part of the plan," he said. "You remember the plan, right? Distance. Silence. No cracks." "The plan was built on fear." She shot back, voice trembling but loud now. "Your fear. My fear. Everyone else's expectations. I followed it for years, Jungkook. I swallowed every question, every impulse. And tonight my mouth betrayed me because my mind couldn't take it anymore." He stopped pacing and faced her. "You think I'm not tired too?" His voice dropped, rough with emotion. "You think living like this doesn't eat me alive?" They stared at each other, the air between them thick with things unsaid. Winter could see the war inside him, The idol trained to control every breath colliding with the man who was sick of hiding. She stood up slowly, her movements careful, as if sudden motion might shatter him. "Then tell me," she said quietly. "Tell me why you're still protecting a lie that's destroying you." Jungkook's lips parted, then pressed together. He looked away, eyes fixed on the dark window, his reflection fractured by city lights. "Because the truth doesn't just hurt me," he said. "It hurts everyone around me. My members. My family. You. You don't get to decide that alone," Winter replied, stepping closer. "You made me part of this the moment you trusted me." He laughed once, hollow. "Trusted you? I dragged you into it." "No," she said firmly. "You gave me a choice. And I stayed." The room fell silent again, but this time it wasn't empty. It was loaded, vibrating with tension. Jungkook's phone buzzed on the table, harsh and sudden. Both of them froze. He glanced at the screen, his expression shifting instantly. "It's starting," he muttered. Winter's stomach dropped. "What is?" People asking questions they shouldn't. He held the phone up so she could see the messages stacking rapidly, from managers, unknown numbers, contacts marked only with initials. Someone leaked an old photo. Her breath caught. "What photo?" His eyes met hers, heavy with dread. "The one from Berlin. The night everything went wrong." Winter's legs felt weak. Berlin wasn't just a memory. It was a scar. She remembered the cold air biting through her coat, the smell of smoke, the way Jungkook's hand had trembled when he grabbed hers and pulled her into the shadows. She remembered blood on his knuckles and the voice on the phone that had said, "You can't walk away anymore." "They can't prove anything from that," she said, more hopeful than convinced. Jungkook shook his head slowly. "They don't need proof. They just need curiosity." As if summoned by his words, Winter's phone rang. She stared at the screen, her heart pounding. The caller ID made her stomach twist. "Unknown. Don't answer," Jungkook said instantly, but Winter already knew she would. She had always been like this, facing storms head-on instead of hiding. She lifted the phone and put it on speaker. "Winter," a smooth voice said, calm and confident. "You finally slipped." Her blood ran cold. Jungkook's posture shifted, every muscle tensing, eyes narrowing. "Who is this?" Winter demanded. A soft chuckle came through the line. "Someone who's been watching you both for a long time. Someone who knows Jungkook isn't just what the fans see." Jungkook stepped forward, his voice deadly quiet. "Stop calling her." "Oh, I will," the voice replied lightly. "After we talk. All of us." The call ended abruptly, leaving a ringing silence behind. Winter's hands were shaking now. She lowered the phone slowly, fear blooming in her chest. "They know," she whispered. Jungkook moved to her side without thinking, placing a steadying hand on her shoulder. "They know something," he corrected. "Not everything." She looked up at him, eyes glossy. "This is my fault." "No," he said fiercely. "This is bigger than you. Bigger than me. This started long before tonight." He took a deep breath, as if bracing himself, then met her gaze with a resolve she hadn't seen in years. "I'm done running," he said. "If they want the truth, they're going to realize it's not something they can control." Winter searched his face, seeing fear still there, but also something new beneath it. Defiance. "Freedom. Are you sure?" she asked softly. "Once this opens, it won't close again." Jungkook nodded. "I know." She exhaled shakily, then straightened her spine, the familiar fire returning to her eyes. "Then I'm with you. No matter what comes out." Outside, the city continued to glow, unaware that behind one quiet apartment door, two carefully constructed lives were beginning to fracture. Not with a scream or a scandal, but with raw words, shared fear, and a decision that would turn whispers into storms. The storm didn't arrive all at once. It crept in through screens, through vibrations in their phones, through the way the air itself seemed to tighten as dawn approached. Winter sat on the floor with her back against the couch, knees pulled to her chest. Scrolling through headlines, she hadn't slept long enough to escape. Jungkook stood by the window, watching the city turn pale blue as morning erased the night. Neither of them spoke for a long time. Words felt fragile now, like they might snap under their own weight. "They're connecting dots," Winter said finally, her voice hoarse. "Schedules. Locations. Old interviews. Things I forgot I ever said." Jungkook nodded without turning around. "They always do." She looked at him, really looked at him, at the tension in his shoulders, the stillness that meant his mind was moving too fast. "You knew this would happen someday," she said. "Yes," he replied quietly. "I just hoped it wouldn't start with you hurting." That made her laugh softly, sadly. "I've been hurting for years. This just changed the shape of it." He turned then, crossing the room and sitting beside her on the floor. The sun painted his profile in gold, stripping away the stage lights, the armor. "Berlin was when I stopped being only who people thought I was," he said. "That night, I realized my name opened doors and closed mouths. People wanted favors, silence, control." Winter swallowed. "And you said yes." "I said no," he corrected. "And that's when it got dangerous." She remembered now, clearer than ever, the fear in his eyes when he'd told her fragments of it, the way he avoided details like landmines. "The other identity," she said slowly. "It wasn't power. It was protection. For others," he said. "Never for me." The phones rang again, both of them this time, overlapping like alarms. Managers. Executives. Warnings wrapped in polite language. Jungkook stared at his screen, then turned it face down. Winter did the same. "I don't want to lie anymore," she said. Jungkook's jaw tightened. "Neither do I." They went live that afternoon, not on a polished stage or behind scripted smiles, but in a quiet room with neutral walls and no music. One camera, one take. The decision felt surreal in its simplicity. Winter spoke first, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her voice steady despite the fear trembling beneath it. She didn't reveal secrets meant to endanger anyone. She didn't feed the hunger for scandal. She spoke about pressure, about silence, about how a single sentence could carry years of restraint. She admitted she had known Jungkook beyond public distance, not romantically, not scandalously, but truthfully, as a human being. Then Jungkook leaned forward. "I have lived with a split self," he said, eyes fixed on the lens. "One the world knows. One that exists because fame doesn't protect you from everything. I won't dramatize it. I won't glorify it. But I won't deny it anymore." The internet erupted anyway. Some believed them. Some twisted their words. Some demanded more. But something shifted. The narrative lost its sharpest edge. Fear no longer dictated every move. In the days that followed, consequences came, but not the destruction they'd been warned about. There were meetings, apologies that weren't really apologies, adjustments, silence from people who had benefited from secrecy. Jungkook stood his ground. Winter did 2.1 evening. Weeks later, they met again in the same apartment. The city outside felt calmer, or maybe they did. "Do you regret it?" Winter asked, standing by the window now, mirroring where he had once stood. Jungkook thought for a long moment. "I regret how long I let fear decide for me," he said. "Not this." She smiled faintly. "Me neither." They didn't hug dramatically. They didn't promise anything grand. They simply existed in the same space without hiding, without rehearsing. Outside, the world moved on, as it always did, chasing the next revelation. But for Winter and Jungkook, the most dangerous secret had already been faced, not with chaos, but with honesty. And in the end, it wasn't the slip of a word that defined them, but the courage to stand by its truth.